Good evening, mi gente. Thank you so much for joining the Found in Translation VCast, which you're watching now on Facebook Live and Periscope, Twitter, YouTube Live. This is going to be a fantastic show. Thank you so much for joining us. There's a lot going on this week. Initially, we termed this show "It's Getting Kind of Local" because it was getting real crazy, and things have even taken a more dramatic turn, particularly on the island of Puerto Rico. We're definitely going to talk a lot about that. We also will dedicate a little bit of time to discuss the squad, what's next for sort of our movement and the aftermath of President Trump's white nationalist comments this evening. Thank you so much for joining, particularly our Facebook Live followers. We're going to start sort of the formal show in a second, but just want to give a lot of love to all of our Facebook Live audience, particularly and those joining us on the other live platforms. We have an incredible show. Later on the show, we're going to have activists joining in, calling in from Puerto Rico, who are going to give us sort of their on the ground in La Calle perspective of what's happening and the impact of this movement that's taking place on the island. But I'm so proud that we have a very special guest from the media, Nicole Acevedo from NBC Digital, which I'll formally introduce in a second, that's joining us. Albert, say hello to the people out here before we start the formal show.
Great to have everyone here joining us on Facebook, and as Ray said, in Facebook and Periscope. Anywhere you can grab video, you're sure to see the Found in Translation VCast today.
You were right about that, and we're going to start the show, and then we'll formally introduce Nicole. So I'll be let's ready to go. Take a deep breath. Welcome, mi gente. This is the Found in Translation VCast radio show, podcast, YouTube show. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Rico. Thank you so much. Found in Translation is the talk show where we talk about politics and our community's hottest issues from a diverse perspective. There's Jose Collazo. For our radio audience, thank you so much for listening to WPPM Radio 106.5. I love this hashtag, People Powered Media, which you can also listen to not only on the radio in Philadelphia at 106.5 FM, but also listen to it on the TuneIn app. As many weeks, I'm joined by my fearless compadre, host, and producer of Found in Translation, Albert Garcia. LB, there's a lot to talk about, brother.
Welcome. Look, it's been hot in Miami, and the news has been even hotter this week. And, from Trump to AOC to Puerto Rico.
It's amazing. It's amazing that a guy from St. Louis could have the brand around "It's hot in here." I mean, Nelly, it's not that hot there. But a lot going on, LB, and you're right. From coast to coast, there's people reacting to what's happening in our country and on the island, really all over the world. People have seen the protests and the reaction of what's happening. There's so much to talk about. But we are so proud and honored to have a member of the media here with us to discuss, especially what's going on the island of Puerto Rico and how it's impacting the Puerto Rican community and Latino politics. From NBC News Digital, Nicole Acevedo. Nicole, welcome to Found in Translation.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk more about this.
We are so excited. Not only LB, one of the top emerging Latina journalists, una boricua. ¿De qué pueblo, Nicole, are you from on the island? Where? Say that again. Oh, seguro que sí, of course.
Yeah.
And I found out this afternoon she is a proud Syracuse alum.
Yes,
a member of Orange Nation. Of course, my brother Michael Collazo, who I was just spending some time with, is very happy you're on the show. And so let's get right into it. Nicole, you have been really on the forefront of covering what's going on in the island of Puerto Rico for quite some time, frankly. But obviously the last week to 10 days has just really been an incredible moment in history. So let's just start from the beginning. Can you just share with people that maybe were on vacation or just haven't followed as closely as you have, what has taken place over the last week on the island?
Well, I mean, I think that especially what we saw yesterday, which was the biggest protest we've seen in Puerto Rico in at least 2-3 decades. We have tens of thousands of people that showed up to Old San Juan calling for the governor Rosello to resign. And that whole movement started because, I mean, there's really a lot of things piling up that Puerto Ricans have been grappling, but the tip of the iceberg was these chats that were leaked. So they were being, a lot of fragments here and there were being leaked last week to local media, but on Saturday, the Center for Investigative Journalism in Puerto Rico published nearly 900 pages of a chat from a platform called Telegram, and it included Rosello and 11 other members of his administration, including the Secretary of State, including the top financial representative that represents the governor and the fiscal board control and other things. And I mean, what people saw in those chats, it felt almost like a confirmation of what Puerto Ricans have kind of been saying, what people talk about in the island. Like, well, where is the money going to, or why is Ricardo Rosello not saying that thousands of people died? If you guys remember when that happened, he kept saying that 65 people
That's right.
was the official death toll. And in this chat there's even like mockery around the deaths of Hurricane Maria, and seeing that lack of sensibility, I think, really fired like sparked something in people, a fire that they were just saying, you know what, we had enough. I think Ricky Martin said it best. We've been like, dicen, se burlaron de nosotros. They were making fun of us. They were offending us. They were degrading us. And, we've had enough. This needs to stop. And I think that was just the tip of the iceberg. And people just started to activate and take the streets. And let's not forget, those chats were leaked right after 6 people, including the former Secretary of Education and the Secretary of ACES, an agency that deals with health services in Puerto Rico. They were arrested, and the FBI it's investigating them right now for fraud and embezzlement. And we're talking, all those things piling up. It's what the manifestation that we're seeing this week, and that people need to be talking about more and more and more. So we'll see. There's more protests to come, even though we had the biggest one yesterday with big celebrities. There were protests today. There are protests on Saturday in front of Fortaleza. Tomorrow they're gonna have protests called El Caldorazo. So people are gonna be bringing pots to La Bahía Urbana in Old San Juan and walk to Fortaleza. And at 8 p.m., even if you're not in Fortaleza, wherever you are, if you want Ricardo Rosello to resign, just bang your pots and pans. That's what people planning the protest are looking to do, to make a statement like that.
I put on Facebook. I put on Facebook last night, Nicole. I don't know if you saw La India was singing. I think it might have been Wednesday night or Tuesday night. She was singing from one of the build in the second
balcones in Old San Juan.
in Old San Juan. And I said, being a Puerto Rican, I was like living in a movie. It's so dramatic, and we're all a part of it on some level. I know wanted to ask you a question around sort of how if you could share with people sort of how this is the tipping point. But LB, before you ask your question, why don't you briefly share with people watching on our live video platforms how they can get engaged in the conversation?
Sure, they can get engaged. Obviously, you're watching at Facebook Live. You can go to Crowdcast. Go to crowdcast.io /e/discussed 0718. I'll drop the link in Facebook if folks want to come and ask questions directly to you. I'll also be monitoring the Facebook page and dropping you guys the questions that people over there might be asking and the response that people are doing there. But Nicole, I'm curious, because a lot of times, especially here, we've seen with all these different protest movements, the question becomes, is this a spark to something bigger? Is this a moment, or is this part of a movement? And again, people have been calling for the Puerto Rican people to rise up, for decades, among a number of different ways. And so, how do you see it from your perspective? What are the chances that this, kind of really infuriates folks, not just around this particular, governor, but just in general about, in terms of what's going on the island?
I mean, I think, this is something that I think it's because it's one of the first times that we've seen people from different ideologies, people from different social economic backgrounds, everybody coming together, the PNPs, the independentistas, the people that believe in the Commonwealth. It's, I think that's why it was so big yesterday, right? You have people upset on every level. And I think that what needs to happen now is that, yes, people are upset about, all the corruption investigations going on in the administration. People are upset about the chats. People are upset that he just continued to cling to his governor's seat, right? What needs to happen now is starting to have the conversations about, where else can people agree on, right? And start creating more connections and meaningful collaborations between groups that maybe didn't necessarily found a common ground in the past. And we'll see how that will take place, if it will, but it's definitely an opportunity right now. That's why you have many people also bringing up other concerns, like added the debt. That was one of the demands in the protests yesterday. And let's declare a state of emergency for machismo culture in the island, with all the women that have been killed in domestic abuse relationships, or at the hands of violence, right? Of male violence. And I think that it's there is a moment it's starting to happen, but we need to see if those violence turns into powerful alliances moving forward, and trying to make a stronger Puerto Rico in years to come.
Yeah, there was a definite, very strong tinge of misogyny and these gender dynamics in this whole situation, right? Because I don't know if there was any women on that chat, virtually none or very few. Not only the misogynistic language, the homophobic language, to call the terminology he used for a former, um, one of the most prominent Puerto Ricans in the mainland, the former council president of New York City, Melissa Mark Viverito.
Yes.
And then this harkened to months before, when some of the femicide issues you were just talking about, when he refused to meet with La Colectiva Feminista for months.
Mm-hmm.
And Bad Bunny and Residente, who now are his biggest critics, knock on the door and he lets them in. So there's
And even back in the chats too, he was in the chats, and that part, he comes across as an opportunist.
Mhm.
Oh, this is gonna give me good press. If I let one of the biggest artists, two of the biggest artists from Puerto Rico globally, into the house and discuss this, while ignoring the fact that the Colectiva Feministas have been asking to meet with him weeks, and they had no answer. That also shows, exactly the pattern, that there's that pattern of behavior. It's not just the words that he used that were offensive and derogatory towards women that are leaders and are powerful. It doesn't matter if he disagrees with them or not. There's a level of respect that a governor should have, to people that have meaningful positions in Puerto Rico. And that was, also derogatory, language referring to Ricky Martin. It's like, oh my God, like, I haven't met a
Cross a
Puerto
big
Rican
line
in my
there, my
life.
friend.
Yeah, like, I've never had a Puerto Rican in my life who, like, is not part of Ricky Martin, who doesn't root for Ricky Martin, who doesn't claim Ricky Martin, like, and then seeing that in that chat, like, all those little things, and then it's almost 900 pages of it. It piles up.
And that's
It
not all of
definitely
it.
does. And it was funny that you mentioned that, Ray. I saw a tweet today that I thought was super on point. It said, Ricardo Rosello's mistake was the same mistake that La Comay did. He messed with women and gays in Puerto Rico. And I was like, damn, I remember that, because that's exactly what La Comay, who was the prime
That's
time
right.
show in the island for years, the minute that man, who it's a man behind the door, started saying super offensive things about women and gays, people got him out of the TV. It didn't matter that he was a primetime show in the island.
And Ricky was one of his main targets at that point, when Ricky was in the process of coming out and all that stuff. And we're talking to Nicole Acevedo from NBC News Digital here, talking about the aftermath of this incredible, series of scandals that have rocked the island, of course, starting with Julie Keller and the former Secretary of Education on the island and her network accused of a variety of issues related to the misuse of funds on the island. And of course, this crescendo of these chats, total classic Puerto Rican stuff, people watching Chando and hundreds of pages of first of all, it's also a very unprofessional way of running your government, like on chat rooms. I mean, that was another criticism.
It was true on it. And it was, you had the most important officials in the Rosello administration in Puerto Rico, in this chat. And I think that seeing, it is true, we all curse, we all share memes, we all do these things. But I think that not seeing any other interaction aside from that, and also seeing how they were trying to, how aware they were of just how people perceive them in the media instead of just doing their jobs.
That's right.
Was a red flag for people, I think.
Nicole, from you're talking to people on the island, how much of it do you think is really sort of the tipping point from decades? Because one of the issues, and I was talking to someone the other day, a Puerto Rican and now lives in DC, that grew up on the island, and she said, look, for years we've voted with our feet, and a lot of people have been frustrated by the perceived corruption and the perceived cronyism by both major political parties, frankly, for the last 20, 30 years. So how much of you think this was sort of like the last straw? I think it even goes beyond this governor and this last couple of years, because it really is about us being tired around this lack of ethical government and this lack of control, which obviously the Promesa board and even exacerbates. So how much of it do you think is from all these years of frustration?
I mean, definitely. And also people, I think, are having a moment of self, or like inner reflection. Like they're trying to think, like, man, like, because, I think it kind of stemmed from the governor's answers and responses to these protests. And, people are asking, hey, why don't you resign? Clearly, thousands of people in this country want you to resign. And his answer is, well, the others have to resign. I don't have to resign because the people elected me. And it's almost like it feels, like he literally feels that he is entitled to that position because of that. But I mean, and the fact that he's able to say that, and people are just like, damn, like, I guess we did put in there. And they're kind of thinking, what can I do in the next election, which is in 2020, to not elect somebody like that, that if I believe that they didn't deliver on their promises, that he just refuses to step down. I think there's that process in people's minds, and especially in the island, of saying, I can't just vote for the party that my entire family has voted for generations, just because they support a certain ideology. Because ideologies is an idea, but maybe the candidates that are trying to move those ideologies forward are not the ones that people like. For example, right now, a lot of pro-state voters are like upset because if Ricardo Rosello, who is from the pro-statehood party, it's supposed to move forward that cause, what he's doing right now, it's not helping that cause.
No,
right?
Not at all.
Even President Trump saying like, hey, I've been calling you, corrupto, that you're corrupt, since day one, when they were trying to advocate for more aid for Maria and things like that. And Rosello, the governor himself, put in a silver platter, the perfect argument for the president to use, and to be able to say, no, I'm not going to give you more aid. No, I'm not going to give you statehood. So there's also, a reckoning too with how people think about party systems in the island.
And you're listening to Nicole Acevedo from NBC News Digital. Remind people, Nicole, before we get into some other questions, and I'm going to check in with LB to see if either Jason or others are going to join us on the chat. Remind us, Nicole, where we can find you on social media.
Yes, you can find me at Nicole Marie _A on Twitter. On Facebook, I'm just Nicole Acevedo. And on Instagram, I am at Nicole Acevedo Rods. That's RODZ.
All right, sounds good. And,
of Rodriguez.
Yes, and LB's added your social media, one of your social media handles to the chat room. And again, you're listening to the Found in Translation podcast and video talk show. You also listen to this as a radio show on WPPMLP Philadelphia 106.5 hashtag People Powered Media. Albert, do you have any other questions for Nicole? Or do we have any other folks that want to join the chat or any other interactions you want to note?
Well, I tell you, we've got Nicole, we've got Jason and Madeleine, your colleagues here. They're on. So I don't know if you want to invite them.
Why don't we get Jason on, because he's actually on the island, and we can get a real life version. And we'll get to you, Madeleine, also in a moment. But let's start with Jason if we can.
Okay, so see if we can get Jason on.
Yeah,
Jason, if you're still there, you see a pop up on your screen, and just grab it so you can join us in. Hopefully,
that's
you'll
right.
be able to get it in a couple seconds.
While we're loading up Jason, Nicole, maybe you could share with us. I know you've been talking to a lot of people on the island. The protests really gotten to a fever pitch over the last few days. So just give people a sense of the feedback you're getting from people on the island around the protest. There's been, we've had sort of the same pattern the last few days. They're incredibly peaceful. Then sort of as it's wrapping up, there's some questions as to sort of who started it. Was it the crowd? Was it, through this? There was reports of tear gas coming from the police side, but that's still unclear. So just give people a sense of what's happened in the streets over the last few days on the island.
Well, I mean, just to start, that protests have been increasingly getting bigger from Saturday. I mean, people were kind of protesting since Thursday when the first fragments of the chats were being leaked, but people started protesting religiously every single day since Saturday when the whole thing was leaked. The fact that they have been increasingly getting bigger, and the fact, like, even yesterday, like, people that, like, family members of mine, friends of mine that would normally not attend rallies, they were all there. They were, like, posting and sending pictures, and I was like, oh my God, in order even for X person to show up, that's something. Like, I remember thinking about that when I was watching everything come in, and right now, it's, again, I think that what the caution that people have to have now, especially in the island that are protesting, we can't get impatient. People in the island cannot get impatient, and somebody described it super well earlier today. Dice, Puerto Rico es como un barril de pólvora y cada día que pasa la mecha se hace más corta. Meaning, like right now, Puerto Rico, it's like a gunpowder, like a barrel of gunpowder, and every day that goes by, the little mechita, I don't know how to say that in English, gets shorter. Like, people are losing patience, and that can sometimes lead to altercations. And also to mention that fuse. Thank you, Madeleine.
There you go. Thank you.
The fuse shortens with every day that goes by. But and I think that the people in the administration might want to use that to their advantage in a way, and they're gonna push people to their limits, and the police in Puerto Rico, in terms of their practices in riots and in protests, it's questionable. There's no documented evidence about that in years past. Even in the May Day protests a couple years back, the ACLU denounced, a lot of the tear gas use, for example, that happened in that protest, and things like that. So there really needs to be caution. Right now, there's not concrete evidence of anything, like you were saying, Ray, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on, because it could be very unpredictable right now.
Wanted to ask you what you observed as it relates to the reaction of the diaspora. It's been really incredible. Like I said, being Puerto Rican is like living in a movie right now, because you go on your Facebook feed, you're seeing protests and actions, and not only around the country, but around the world. I mean, Barcelona, Paris, obviously the East, the traditional Puerto Rican communities in the East Coast, and Chicago and in Florida. Our friends just did an amazing event in Phoenix, Arizona the other day. There was a protest in Seattle with Puerto Ricans that live in the tech industry. So, and I know that, our perspective is a little different, but obviously is really a keen post Maria, when the diaspora sort of woke up to a lot of these issues. So I'm curious, Nicole, what are you hearing from people, Puerto Ricans living in the mainland, around their concerns, and what kind of share with people what kind of activity we're seeing, because there's a lot of protesting and a lot of action happening in the States as well.
I mean, we have to remind people that more Puerto Ricans live in the U.S. than in the island, right? So you're talking about, I don't know, about 5 million Puerto Ricans that live in the U.S. and 3.2 million that live in the island. And like we saw after Maria, whenever the island is in crisis, whatever crisis it is, the diaspora activates. Like they just, respond. They understand that there is a need to amplify the voices of the people in the island, in the US and everywhere in the world, but specifically in the US, because a lot of the things that happen in Puerto Rico are decided in mainland.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that we've seen that again now. I mean, we've seen protests in San Francisco, New York City, Orlando, Texas, Philly. It's there's really, I feel like as long as people in the island continue to protest, people in the diaspora will also do that. It's saying that you guys are not alone. We care about what happens in the island, and whatever we can do from the mainland to help, push or add pressure to make things happen for the best, for the better in Puerto Rico, people in the mainland will do it. The connection is super close. Like yesterday, I spoke with a protester that attended the New York City rally, and she's been in New York City not even a month, and she was here, and she was just like, "Oh my God! Like if I were in Puerto Rico, I would go out, but I'm not there, so it was just a no-brainer." She was telling me like it's a no-brainer that I just have to show up here in New York City. Lin-Manuel Miranda was there. Hundreds of people joined that protest in Union Square, which was significantly a bigger crowd than the protest that happened on Monday, which was the first one here in the States. They started kind of happening from between Monday and yesterday and Wednesday. So, I mean, yeah, as long as people in the island continue to protest, people in the diaspora will too.
Yeah, no, and it's very important. And Yashira Yaga Rivera, who frequently hosts a show with me as well, particularly on the radio version of the program. She made a note that basically asked a question on Facebook. Well, how do we use this as a tool, a mechanism to get more Puerto Ricans in the mainland, whether they've been here multi-generations or more recently arrived, like you just shared, Nicole, to come out and vote next year? And obviously that's going to have a lot of implications on the island and our whole democracy, and we'll get into that a little later in the show. But and I think we've talked about this, that the significance, one of the main real significant moments that this really brings to mind is that this is a bipartisan unifying political moment for the island and for the Puerto Rican diaspora. This isn't like you said, even people from Governor Rosello's party are upset at him, and many of which feel, not all, but many of which feel he should also resign. And so I think as we mobilize Puerto Ricans, particularly sort of mixed Puerto Ricans, and I say that to say sort of Neo-Ricans like me in a sense. I mean, I'm a Philly Rican, but Puerto Ricans that were born and raised here, and people that are more recently arrived, is that there should be an agenda around how do we first and foremost, we've been saying this a lot on the show for years, even before Maria, antes de la promesa, is that the priority for the island should really be an ethical cleanse of the government. And that's a bipartisan issue. We've had issues with all the parties on the island for some time. Let's be honest about that. And so there's really this ethical cleanse, because there's no, if we can't have leadership that we can trust, we can't move anything forward on the island, frankly. So I think there has to be a call to ethics, a call to accountability, and a call to, to take a step back and say, the reality is the status question is not going to be, there's not going to be much movement on that, in the near future. But the question is, how do we continue to act as a nation and continue to do that, thinking about literally probably the hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to Puerto Rican diaspora in goods and services and in money provided for the island post Maria. The activism that you're seeing here, not only sort of in protesting, but working with our elected officials. I mean, again, like you said, we have more clout with senators and Congress people and federal officials than obviously anyone on the island, because of their lack of being able to vote in the general elections. So to the Asira's question, this is really a call to say, let's put the status question aside, because there's so many things. Principally, let's clean up our act on the island from a government perspective, and let's move forward with working together on all the things, whether it's dealing with the recovery efforts, whether it's assisting people that have migrated to potentially move back or at least settle in where they're at in the States, and all the other things impacting the island. So there's a lot we can do. LB, can we try? I know we're having an issue with Jason. Can we try to see maybe if we get Madeleine in? If for whatever reason Jason's on his cell, so that might be his issue. But LB, can we see if we can get Madeleine in if she's available?
Yeah, I just sent you an invite, so you should see a pop up on your screen. So maybe that'll work a little bit better with you as we try to get Jason.
Okay, LB, any other feedback from the chat or anything else you wanted to chime in on?
Well, I think one of the things that's real interesting is that from the outside, here we're talking about, I think it's really interesting that at the same time we're talking about people being more active and engaged, we're seeing an activism around the Puerto Rican community that, that is almost analogous to, what we saw, 5 years ago with, what was going on with the Black Lives Matter, with Eric Gardner, like just in terms of the visibility of Puerto Ricanness. Is something that I think that really, I think it's been a long time since people could see that beyond like, cultural kind of things, beyond like salsa or reggaeton, beyond like, baseball, beyond something like that. You're seeing like an actual visibility of Puerto Rican activism on mainstream media, right? Because we've seen, if you're in these circles and pockets and you follow it, you can. And so I think it's, I'm curious, Nicole, in terms of what's been the reaction of your own colleagues in the journalism circles around seeing this kind of active public face of Puerto Ricanness. Can they handle it? Is this something that's, are they prepared, for that?
I think a lot of it, like, to be honest, even though we've been, engaged with these communities for so long and talking about this for a while now, a lot of people, especially in mainstream media, really started to pay attention to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. There was some sort of like an uptick around 2015 when the former governor then, Alejandro Garcia Padilla, said that the Puerto Rico was not going to be able to pay its debt. And it's a lot of it is just seeing everything for the first time. And learning as we're going. So what I find myself a lot of times doing when I'm writing the stories for the general public is that I still need to do that work, right? Of explaining people the background story of things, right? But in a way, I think that at least the visibility is increasing. Right now, we have the big, reporters in big networks paying attention to the island constantly. You have people like David Beckno and CBS, Patricia Macei and Frances Robles in the New York Times. You have it's something that I think that has come with what has happened, the fallout after Maria. But I don't think people necessarily have a comparison between before and after, because most people that are mainstream media are kind of catching up to things now.
And there's a big learning curve, right? Because just reminding people, including our president, that we're U.S. citizens. And, you know, we've seen a lot of anti-Puerto Rican discrimination, and, you know, being attacked as immigrants because of our language. Can we hear Madeleine Villanueva? Madeleine has a question.
Are you able to hear me?
We can hear. We can't see you, unfortunately, but we can hear
That's
you. Madeleine
fine.
Villanueva.
You don't wanna
Madeleine
see me
Villanueva, great
like that.
activist and friend. Madeleine, your question for Nicole.
No, well, no, I just find it really interesting, the conversation that you were saying that family members that you probably wouldn't have expected to participate in protests, right, are beginning to participate in protests. And I would say that even amongst my family, and my family is something Kong, which is I've never known my family to really be about activism. That's been usually something that's sort of kind of frowned upon almost, you know, even if people have strong opinions about what's happening around them, you behave a certain way, you follow law and order. Las cosas se hacen bien, se hacen con orden, you know, and
Sí, dice esta mentalidad de como que, oh, eso les gusta causar problemas o les gusta causar revolú.
Los radicales,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, exactly. A lot of people, yes, a lot of people.
I mean, Residentes can be a very polarizing figure on the island. People like me, wonderful, but on the island, and even people like in the States, where generally speaking, it varies, but generally speaking, particularly outside of Florida, Puerto Ricans have a very general favorable feeling towards San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín. On the island, she's a very polarizing figure. So, you know, so that matters.
So you experienced the same thing, Madeleine, like you started seeing people that you normally didn't wouldn't know that they would want to attend a protest, attending the protest this week?
Well, I've been looking for video because supposedly there was going to be a and they made it very clear there was supposed to be manifestación pacífica en Rincón, pero no he visto videos, so no sé cuántas personas han aparecido. But even posting on Facebook about it and you know, using the hashtag Renuncia Ricky, that has been surprising because I had not seen that before. But there is also this strong sort of current that is particularly amongst, I think, the older generations who, and even some of the younger ones in my, no, I shouldn't say that. Where ahí va, ahí siempre lo dañan, you know, putting the blame on the small group, which may or may not be accurate. We don't know exactly where the fireworks came from or not. Video I've seen clearly shows that the box was behind the line, but that may have been only one day, not every day. But I pointed out to them, like, don't let the message get co-opted. Don't let the message be minimized by this group, whether or not we agree with them or not, whether they're in the right or the wrong. Like, don't let the narrative get co-opted. You know, you yourself don't that into that. You know, you focus on your message, and the message is not criticizing these young people, whoever it is that is involved in the altercation with law enforcement.
Yes, Nicole. No, Nicole, please.
I was gonna say that now that you mentioned that, there was a part that reminded me of part in the chat. I am one of the people that read the 889 pages of the chat, especially knowing that this is gonna be
Syracuse alums are very studious people.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be doing my job. I didn't know this is gonna keep developing for weeks or months. But there's a part in the chat that they're talking about a protest that happened outside the power authority. And they even allude to, like some reason they started vandalizing the building, and someone in the chat said, yes, just destroy it, take it apart, one less agency that we have to care about closing. That's in the chat. And in the statements that we've seen so far from the governor and different people in the administration that have done press conferences after this protest, always make sure to make a point to say, yeah, the protests turned violent and we condemn that, or saying, that he, like, and saying, for example, how many police officers got injured, which is important, but we don't know how many protesters have gotten injured. Those numbers are not out. We can, from being in the protest, people can kind of gauge, but we don't know for certain how many protesters have been injured as part of the tear gas or the rubber bullets or things like that. So, that's also another thing that we've seen so far that the administration uses, as a tactic to turn the fire down in terms of people arguing for or demanding the administration to do certain things, even though the people were the ones that elected them.
I want to ask Madeleine a question. Madeleine, as an activist, what do we do? What are your thoughts around what do we do next? I mean, we have Natasha Bannon, who is an incredible legal advocate for us with Latino Justice, wrote a very passionate Facebook post arguing this is a game-changing moment, not only potentially for Rosello's administration, but potentially for the colonia, as she refers to it. What could this, this could create fundamental change in terms of the island moving forward, potentially. But Madeleine, so we're, as activists, whether we're here on the island or in the diaspora, as you and I are, what do you think should be our strategy? How do we take advantage of this moment to move the quality of life of the island forward and move our build power for the people who made it on the island, which, 2/3 of us have been displaced, including myself, and so many of us that no longer live on the island because of these circumstances for decades. So Madeleine, as an activist, what do you think we should be doing next?
Well, that's like the $64 million question, but I think it's important, and I guess I come from the position of having been born and raised here, and I feel that there needs to be a bridge. I feel that I need to be wary, and those of us that want to be helpful, and even that word helpful, but need to be wary of not imposing necessarily our views for the future of the island on the island, because then how different are we, from what we are trying to undo. But collaborating and maybe building bridges and learning more about what those who are still on the island are striving to do. And I'm sure there are many, and that's not to discount that the diaspora's opinion doesn't matter, because there are a lot of people, as you said, Rafael, that are not there, not because they don't want to be there, right? Many may want to return if the circumstances on the island were different. So how do we kind of bridge all those needs and desires, and where the commonality, I think, is the love of Puerto Rico, and the culture, and come up with a vision that we can help build. Sorry, not usurp. I think that's it.
That's it. Madeleine Villanueva, I want to give you some love. We want to get a few of the other folks in the chat to jump on to join Nicole with the time that we have with her left. But I just wanted to give you some love, Madeleine, because you might be the #1 fan of the show, and you have been from day one, and as a friend, but as someone that really engages authentically with the audience, with really responds to our topics. I just want to give you, as you're part of the fam, and And the only regret I have with the show is that this is the first day you were on it. So you need to be on it more. So Madeleine Villanueva, thank you so much for joining the show, my friend. And
Thank you,
we'll
everyone.
definitely have you on very soon. And we're going to have some other people join in on the chat. While we set up the next person to talk, Nicole, I wanted to note, and he may be able to join himself, but Jason Ortiz is having some technical issues. He's on the island. He did note in the chat. This is from Jason Ortiz. Well, he may be jumping on. There's Jason.
Hey.
Where would make this work? Jason Ortiz, an activist from Connecticut, who we work with on a variety of issues, happen to be on the island. Jason, tell people your story and your experience being on the island this week.
Sure. So my name is Jason Ortiz. I'm the president of the Connecticut Puerto Rican Agenda. So I've been working on issues related to justice for Puerto Rico and Connecticut for the last few years. And I actually came this week in order to see my family and kind of catch up. And it just so happened the timing happened to be this week. And so when me and my partner came through, we actually were staying in Viejo San Juan on Monday and were able to participate in the protest directly and share our experiences with the rest of the world. And I think that's an important part of the responsibility of the diaspora. We have the networks that can share and be the megaphone for the island to all these other bigger organizations and different institutions in the States, and making sure that we're using our power to address the congressional leadership that have been both, part and parcel of creating this negative situation, but also the other Boricuas that have left either recently or a long time ago that maybe never had to engage with the very specific issues of colonialism because it hasn't confronted them until two events, right? Until Hurricane Maria, and then also this. And I do think that these are issues that have been built up for a very long time. And we've had a number of conversations that I do think that the negative and the negligence that came after Hurricane Maria are part of why people are, so upset right now. And so we can't, in my opinion, disconnect those two situations. And we need to be able to not only connect those two issues, but connect this and our history to other Boricuas that maybe never had the opportunity to learn any of it, because we don't learn it in school, we don't learn it in a lot of our own communities. Excellent. And so as what the diaspora can do now is to engage those other people. When I went to college, there was nobody recruiting me to work on Puerto Rican issues. But now that situation may be different, right? Now there are people saying, we need you to get involved. We need you to use your voice to share the information. And one thing that has happened as a result of struggle after Hurricane Maria is that the diaspora and the island networks are much stronger than they were before. And so I was able to share my experience very rapidly with a lot of people, and not just Puerto Ricans, to show exactly what was going on.
Jason, you brought up a very good point about activism on the federal level. And I mentioned this when we were together in New York City, I think last spring, is that it's not a coincidence that the Connecticut senators are some of the most active as it relates to Puerto Rican issues because of the leadership of our Connecticut Puerto Rican community. And I'm not just kissing up to the brother, but it's true. But they've been very helpful. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of people. I mean, the list goes on and on. Jason, give us talk about the streets, brother. I want to hear your experience. Like I said, I've been saying on Facebook the last few days, like watching being a part of a movie. I mean, it's just so surreal. So talk to us.
How big was the crowd? Tell me like a movie. Tell me everything.
Sure. So, my friend Milia Arroyo, she owns Caldera Cafe, which is on, where the plaza is. She was right there. And so our adventure, sort of started there. But then we noticed that there was massive crowds everywhere we were. And so we went very directly to Calle Fortaleza, where they have the big umbrellas that everyone, sees and takes many pictures. And that's actually where the direct confrontation was happening. And so the street itself was packed. It was impossible to really move around. And you could see pretty far in front of you, but we were there for a good couple hours and nothing, that interesting was happening. We were taking pictures and, talking to people. But then all of a sudden, a big rush of people trying to run away happened. And that's when we noticed immediately that clouds of things were coming. And I had been in protests before. I've experienced tear gas and pepper spray and things like that. The bigger issue was this stampede of people leaving was more a problem. And I was very proud of my people because very quickly, a group of folks just started saying, suave, go slow. And so once people started to engage each other in crowd control, I noticed a shift, right? And that was when people were able to sort of manage the situation. But as far as how many people there, every block around the area was just packed. And every time we moved, it was also flooded. The plaza, like where a lot of folks go and take pictures with the pigeons, was just like a rock concert where people are shoulder to shoulder trying to figure out what to do and where to go. And this was on Monday at like midnight, right? It was pretty late at that point. But I did notice folks would leave in one direction and then go right back exactly to where the front of the line was, essentially. And I would say 110%. There was very little happening until that first tear gas canister was thrown or shot, however you want to look at it. But then, we're very closely, and if you go to the Connecticut Puerto Rican Agenda's Facebook page, there's a number of videos there. Eventually, the crowd did start to mobilize more aggressive tactics and started to use a lot of the plastic garbage cans as barriers. And so they're on wheels. And so we saw folks start to take those and block off other areas that were then creating more than one confrontation zone, right? So at first it was just directly under the umbrellas, and the front of La Fortaleza was the main spot, but then there was lots of them after a while. And so we started to, move around and see what was going on. But at a certain point, one of the streets, and I believe it was still La Fortaleza, Calle Fortaleza, but it got a little confusing there for a minute. One got lit on fire. And so when that happened, it was a very large fire because plastic burns big and smoky, and it got to be very intense. And that's when we saw the police sort of lose control, right? And it was clear that they did not have control of the situation at all. The protesters were clearly more organized in figuring out what to do and how to respond to different situations. And the only real harm I felt was when folks started to run away in crowds, and somebody was older, maybe might fall. That was really the main concern I saw. But I noticed that once the fire happened, it was almost like the police knew they had lost control.
And Jason, what was, because I know a lot of, especially on Monday and also this morning, publications like El Nuevo Dia, the national newspaper in Puerto Rico, they started showing pictures of how it was all San Juan left after the protest, and you see like the graffiti and everything, and it's almost like there's mixed feelings about how people feel about that. Some people feel like, why they gotta protest and destroy San Juan? And some people are like, well, graffiti, you can paint that over, but there's real issues here that people are angry about, and that's the way of expressing. Scene that you saw, and how were people in Old San Juan reacting to all those things, like the aftermath of the protest?
Well, I mean, it's funny. I went back the next day, and Miglia, my friend, Telemundo was around, and they were trying to take pictures. And she was actually saying, "Oh no, that's old graffiti. That's been there before." And so, having graffiti on the walls, I wouldn't personally do it. I don't think it's very helpful. It doesn't get us anywhere. But it's not like our dilapidated buildings and neighborhoods aren't currently covered in graffiti all the time right now because of the lack of investment in our neighborhoods.
And we have to put it in perspective. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that were there. And if we're talking about I saw it on Facebook, on your Facebook. We're talking about maybe a couple dozen people that were involved in that.
Right.
And we have to also think about the scope of this. Let's say there was 200,000-300,000 people there. It's hard to tell, right? But you're talking about a good chunk of the island. I mean, we're talking about a significant percentage of people from the island. I mean, 2, 3, 4% of the entire population was there. So potentially, we're talking and overwhelmingly peaceful. Overwhelmingly peaceful.
And also there was arguments happening in the moment of people telling those folks to stop. And so that was another interesting dynamic where somebody would pick up something to throw it, and someone would literally grab their arm and say no, right? And so there was tension within the crowd over how to handle that. And, not everybody got stopped, of course. But as you said, when we're talking thousands of people, like, it was hard to even notice that, right? Just because there were so many people and so many police and so many, bigger problems happening in the moment, that I'm sure, folks definitely did do it. But, when we're talking thousands and thousands of people, we're talking the future of our island. It just wasn't on the top of my, worries.
Yeah. No, but what I mean the next day, because, for example, like the governor used that as a response. He's like, mira cómo dejaron viejo San Juan, like that's unacceptable. And people on social media commented about it. So, for example, this morning, I think it was Telemundo or some of the local news shows interviewed people that lived in San Juan, and some of them were like, you know what? No, like it's not like they weren't as upset, even though they're the ones that are directly affected and live there. They were like, I am more concerned. I think I can't remember if it was on radio, but I think it was one of the top reactors in Old San Juan, and she was like, you know what? I'm more concerned about how these buildings are being sold to people that don't necessarily have the intention of keeping the cultural patrimony that this place is.
Thank you.
You know, like she was, you know, that some people were like, you know what? Yeah, it's a problem, but we're missing the big picture. Like this,
Right.
people were brought up other concerns. So that's why I wanted to ask you, since you were there, if you
Well,
if you experienced that.
Oh, absolutely. Like nobody cared about that. Like it was just so that the issues are so much bigger, and there's this very bizarre false equivalency that happens whenever, massive protests go out where, letting 4,000 people die is being compared to graffiti as if they're both, like bad things that happened. And the reality is, it would never have happened if Rosello stepped down 3 days ago or 4 days ago. It wouldn't have happened, right? And so if you have a massive group of people that say, we want justice, and you continuously tell them no, they have to find a way to escalate to be heard, right? Just like a young child that doesn't get what they want, eventually they get really loud about it. And if they don't want to listen, they're leaving the protesters no other option, right? So now, just the other day, we had hundreds of thousands of people. And if you still don't listen to that, it leaves folks no option. So the ethics of tactics, right, is always dependent on what you have available to you that's going to work and what's going to actually help. And when we have to think about the consequence of inaction, if we're going to let this continue and let this happen again and again and again and again, then, there's only so many options given to the people left. And so unless, the Senate decides to remove Rosello or some other entity or person in a position of power actually puts forward something that's going to do something, it leaves the people no other choice but to escalate.
So, Jason, we for those that want to see Rosello go, he hasn't gone. And of course, Nicole, you can confirm this. There's no, the legal mechanism or the governmental mechanism would be impeachment through a legislature that he controls. So this has to be an organizing effort. So for those
impeaching Trump, man.
Yeah.
In Puerto Rico, it complicates a little bit because even if he cede a la presión de la gente and he resigns, right? The next person in line will be the Secretary of State, who also resigned. And then the interim governor would be the Justice Department person, Wanda Vázquez, and she's a very controversial figure in the island. She was actually being investigated on whether she had ethical issues in the way she was running the agency and stuff like that. Even though nothing was found, they were investigating it, and that created her to become like a polarizing figure in the island. And then the next person in line will be El Secretario de Hacienda, the Treasury Secretary in Puerto Rico, and he's not 35. You have to be 35 to be governor of Puerto Rico. So there's that added layer of
what a mess,
that. But there have been some movement in the impeachment side of things. There's a House representative from del Partido Independentista in Puerto Rico, Rep. Dennis Marquez. He introduced a measure kind of outlining, I think it was 18 occasions in the chat that are possible cause for investigation and towards impeachment.
But Rosello said everything was legal. That's incredible. Even have the audacity to say that.
But he attributed to, he said that he hired lawyers first he said it was an internal report in the same press conference, and then he said it was personal, that it was like a personal report that he did with personal lawyers that he
in a day and a half. They determined.
So he even contradicted himself in the press conference.
Yeah, he was.
And then when he was asked if he would make this so-called report, arriving to this conclusion public, he said he basically avoided the question. He didn't answer it, which basically means no. But in the impeachment process, Carlos Johnny Mendez, who's the president of the House, and it's from the governor's party, pro-statehood. He said in Telenoticias and Telemundo during the protest that they had selected 3 juristas, so basically like lawyers, to investigate the chats and see if there was probable cause for impeachment. So, you know,
I mean, we can all read.
That.
We can all read. Jason, as an organizer, Jason.
Yeah, the explosive report from the El Centro de Periodismo Investigativo on Wednesday that literally makes the connections. Like, there's a graph that it's like each person in his administration and who influenced the contracts that they got and with what companies, and a lot of it came from the chats. They alluded to some things in the chats, and Centro Periodismo Investigativo just kind of went and got the rest of the evidence to piece the rest of the story together.
Exactly. They're doing a fantastic job on the island. Jason, before we let you go, one of the rising activist leaders that we have, you really know how to organize people. So what do we do next, brother? Whether it's on the island, whether it's in the stateside, what do we do next to move our community forward on the island for our people throughout in our community?
So I strongly encourage every activist out there to hold a discussion session in their community, not an educational forum, right? But we're going to talk to each other as equals in a circle and really dig into these details, because we have to educate ourselves on, how colonialism has created a really complicated situation that is impossible to undo, right? There's just no way that you can make a colonial situation fair. It's not, what it's there to do. But beyond that, once we can engage our own people, I think that is step one. I always say that, talk to the other Puerto Ricans around you, help people understand what's going on. This is a multi-party issue at this point. But then we have to engage all of our congressional elected officials and these presidential candidates to elevate the issue to the national stage and the international stage, because this is an international issue. When we're talking about the political situation that created this mess, is an international problem, right? And so we need everyone that has expertise in this, folks that understand how the UN process works, but we need the national spotlight on Puerto Rico once again, not just about what happened a couple of years ago, but in resolving this once and for all, right? Because if we don't really address this in a really deep way, we're just going to end up with, another person that's 15 chairs down the line that, also had its own corruption. But as an activist, we have to talk to our own people. We have to engage folks that never had to discuss colonialism, independence, statehood, and all of those things, and understand what's going on. Because if we don't understand it as a people, we're never going to be able to solve it.
That's right. And if you can, for my Puerto Rican based activists in the States, they get frustrated by why can't we get, these pockets of lower income Puerto Ricans to mobilize, to vote, to progress in many ways. You can draw a direct line to these challenges and that colonial mentality to the colonialism of the island. Regardless of where we're at on the spectrum, that is the cause of that dynamic that we have in the States, and that lack of education. And continue to have those conversations. We learn from each other, as you just said so well. Jason, let people know where they can keep this conversation with you on social media, brother. We want to get the next person from Florida on the line.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Palante.
Thank you.
All right, Jason Ortiz. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. While we get Vanessa, if Vanessa's still there, I'd like to get Vanessa Rivera from Tampa on. Nicole's very generous with her time, but I know she doesn't have all night. Nicole, the scandal before the Rosello stuff, Julie Keller, Department of Education. Can you give people an update on that? Because I know, that's an issue. A lot of my family, my cousin Dennis Gonzalez, my dad Gonzalez, my cousins that live on the island that are teachers, that was an issue that they were very concerned about. She had been a polarizing figure on the island for quite some time as well. So just give people an update on where that situation was left.
Well, yeah, like you were saying, let's remind that one of the big reasons why Julia Kelleher was such a polarizing figure in Puerto Rico was, she closed hundreds of schools. That's unheard of. And her argument was that because the student population was shrinking, which was true, but nonetheless, it didn't seem like they were taking into account the most vulnerable students that would be affected by those school closures, and actually take that into account in that process. That really made people upset in the island. I remember covering that issue and speaking to her about that, and just the points of view were just not completely opposite. And another reason was her idea to bring charter schools in Puerto Rico. Unlike the States, charter schools don't exist in the island. And she, under her leadership, they implemented the first one ever in Puerto Rico. And the plan was to use that as a model to expand charter schools in the island. And that idea also made her a very controversial figure in the island, and also cuts to like los despidos de los maestros, like firing teachers and things like that. So she was arrested the same week that the chats were leaked. She was arrested along with 5 other people, and she had until Wednesday, actually, when the big protest happened, to come to Puerto Rico. She was arrested in Washington, D.C. She had to come to Puerto Rico to have her first vista en la corte, her first court appearance, and she pleaded not guilty. So we'll see where things go from there. But this is an ongoing question and an ongoing case between all 6 people that were arrested. They're facing 32 counts of things like money laundering and fraud. So that's another thing that's developing at the same time as the past 2 Rosello sign are happening.
Absolutely. And you know, she's got those court cases are going to be, I believe, in the spring, like April, May is when those court cases are set. So that's going to percolate for us. She had been a lightning rod, not only because, you know, you're dealing with the most sensitive issue in our community with education. I mean, this is cuidando los niños nosotros. I mean, there was a lot of issues even immediately after Maria where schools weren't opening quickly enough. And there was a lot of issues how teachers were being treated, teachers not getting paid. There was a lot of stuff. And then her not being a native Puerto Rican, or I don't think she's of Hispanic heritage at all. And, you know, there was, you know, that played into it, right? So it's like, not only do we have issues with her, but she's not even one of us. And it's like, and her, you know, people would tease her for her Spanish. And
that was a very controversial thing in the island. People felt like, why you gotta bring like some people in the island compared it to like the 1800s when they were appointing like people from the United States to be officials in Puerto Rico and rule the island. But I mean, she's a polarizing figure for many, 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 many reasons. But we'll see. I think one of the fears that people in the Rosello administration have, if it doesn't resign, is exactly that these things, the FBI is also investigating not only the Department of Education and other agencies, but Unidos por Puerto Rico. You know, if you remember that was, you know, a lot of people are like, what happened with all this money? Where did it go? And not taking responsibility for los vagones of supplies that were popping out in the island. So, you know, the fear some of them have is the longer Rosello takes to resign, the more questions people are going to start asking, the more the press is going to dig into these issues and maybe tap into things that would hurt the party and hurt Puerto Rico even more. So we'll see.
Yeah, no, there's a lot going on. And LB, if I think Vanessa may have dropped off, but you can come back and join us, LB. I want to start the last segment of the show. We obviously, there's a lot going on in national headlines. We had a unique opportunity to bring on Nicole Acevedo from NBC News Digital. But I did want to, in this last segment of the show, LB, you know, we got to talk about a few other things. And Nicole, we encourage you to chime in as you'd like to. Want to also shout out Jason Ortiz, is reminding us you can find him at Jason Ortiz on IG. I guess that's Jason_Ortiz. And then on Facebook /Jason Ortiz, Jason J. Ortiz. So for our folks that want to continue the conversation with a rising activist doing a lot of good work in Connecticut and on the island. When was the last time, LB, you were in Hartford, Connecticut, brother?
It's been too long. It's been way too long,
huh?
Way too long.
There was a Peruvian restaurant there I used to go to, and then there was a the Puerto Ricans had like a lounge. It was really nice. Hartford's a good town, man. Had some good times back in my day.
A lot of good Latinos in Connecticut. Shout out to the Garcias who are out there in Connecticut as well.
No, you ever been to Willimantic? Now you can talk about real Puerto Rican Jibaro stuff. You ever been to Willimantic, Connecticut, dog? That's where the Puerto Rican migrant farm workers went back in the day. So a lot of good folks out in the CT. LB, you know, history is being made. President Trump had some very shameful comments. Beginning over the weekend when he basically told 4 women of color who are members of Congress to go back where they came from, even though 3 are born in the United States and they're all U.S. citizens and only one's an immigrant. And doubled down on it last night with chants of center back directed at Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who's a Somali immigrant, been here since she was 12 years old and a citizen for, 20 years. You know, I don't want to say we told you so, but you and I and our other cast members, other hosts have been talking about this even before the election of 2016, that this could usher in an era of, want to call it a white nationalism, want to call it xenophobia, want to call it, but really, from my political analysis, is that the 2020 election is really going to be not a referendum of Republican, Democrat, conservative, progressive. It's really a referendum of, do you want to move forward with an autocratic white nationalist state, or you want the democracy more or less as we normally would see it as? So this really leads to a very fundamental choice that we have next year.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think you said, I think everyone kind of says, I think what's amazing about this week's comment or discussion that's been going on is that I think for a lot of, especially I think a lot of professionals of color or people of color who are in leadership positions, they at some point have had a similar moment, right? When someone has wondered why they should be there, or what place do they come from, or should they go back in terms of where they came from, right? And even whether or not, you want to hear the latest remix that Trump is saying that, oh, well, we're talking about, basically an America love it or leave it kind of attitude. How many times have we also heard that as well, right? As people saying, look, I want to make a system better. Well, if you don't like it, why are you even here in the first place, right? Whether it's someone who's working at a job site and someone says, well, if you don't like this job, well, then, you just leave, right? That's never been an excuse for places. But I think it's a really important point where I think whether you're talking about Representative Liu, I think he penned a piece in the Washington Post that basically said the same thing that people have told him at different points of his life, or even in terms of different news feeds, folks have said, I've heard this argument before, kind of thrown at me. And so the thing is, a year out, right? I mean, if we were in the middle of a 2020 election, this would be a different conversation, but we're a year out, right? And so the real question is whether or not all this angst and all this anger, what does it do to people, right? What will it do to people? But I think it's a very clear indication, as you said. I mean, and one of my good friends on Facebook, Sarita McFadden, who's a brilliant writer in her own right, she quoted this Atlantic article that I think that dropped either today or yesterday that Adric Serwerware wrote, and it was titled like "What Americans Do Now Will Define Us Forever," and he talks about this idea of like a multiracial democracy, right? And this is, it's not just white nationalism, but can people actually stand to have people of color, and specifically Black and Latina women, in positions of leadership that they disagree with, and can they handle that, right? And if we can't decide that we can do that, then the world is kind of messed up, because America was built on this idea of going, of bringing in different people and assimilating and integrating them. And if America as a nation can't deal with that, then you have to wonder whether or not that's, what's the recipe for the rest of the world in terms of a multiracial democracy? Because all these democracies have it, right? Whether it's in the Americas, or where you're talking about, this new Europe, where you have immigrants coming in and folding into the system. If a multiracial democracy can't really stand in America, then I don't know where else. I mean, I think there's serious questions of where else it can stand. So I think that's what we're talking about.
And we're seeing challenges, not just in the United States, but in Latin America. Thinking about Brazil, where essentially, Brazil sort of followed the lead of the United States by electing a xenophobe, someone that's not particularly friendly towards the Black population, particularly the indigenous population, our wildlife. I mean, he's a disaster with the environmental stuff. And by the way, sort of as a precursor, manipulated the justice system to throw his opponent, who was leading in the polls, the former President Lula, in prison. So there's a lot of issues there. I would say this, and then I want to get from a journalist perspective, Nicole, I'm going to put you on the spot with the political stuff, but I would say this, that, again, we've been saying this for quite some time. It's unfortunate, but they're now starting to say in the mainstream media, this is his only strategy. Anti-Semitic attacks against progressives around anti-Semitism, socialism, abortion will be used as the red herrings when it is about race. And the unfortunate part is it's going to get worse in this country before it gets better, regardless of the outcome of that election next year. And people are going to get hurt. They're going to continue to get hurt, as we see from our people and children getting hurt on our southern border. Nicole, from a journalist perspective, I mean, this is really hard stuff to cover. I mean, this kind of extreme behavior, extreme rhetoric. I know you're in a very difficult position because you've got to report it as you see it, but at the same time, people are not drawing in the lines here. So, how, as a Latina journalist trying to cover this, how's been? I mean, there's a lot of challenges in covering this rhetoric and this atmosphere at this point.
I mean, absolutely, and I mean it especially with these three reps, right? Because let's remember, right? This Congress elected like unprecedented amount of women of color into the House, right? So he's been targeting AOC, he's been targeting the other two women too, but he's very particular about who he targets and who he decides to call derogatory names and say stuff that it's not true and it's flat out offensive, right? So I mean, as a journalist, you see the pattern, right? Sometimes as a viewer, as an audience member, you see stories singled out, right? But as a journalist, you're in the newsroom every day, you're looking what to cover, and you see the patterns. And this is a pattern that, reflects the same rhetoric that he put out back in 2016, that he was just lashing at people from Mexico and Mexicans in this country. And I think that's the hardest part, how to convey that this is a pattern, right? That this is a tactic that he's used over and over, and make people understand that it's, we don't even know if what it's like journalistically it's also kind of hard because it has no basis in anything, it's like he just like spits out whatever thing, like for example, he did it today when he responded to Puerto Rico. He keeps insisting that Puerto Rico got 92 billion in aid, and that's not true. That number is closer to how much is estimated Puerto Rico can get in the next 2 decades, 20 years.
Exactly.
So it's like this narrative of I'm just gonna say whatever, and if people like it, they're just gonna rally behind me. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. And other leaders, like you were saying, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, other people in other countries are kind of picking up on these practices. You see in Philippines, Duterte also doing really scandalous remarks and follow up with policies. It seems like they're like, well, if it worked for Trump, maybe it works in other parts of the world.
Well, and we've even seen that in the Indian elections, where xenophobia and religious rivalries have surfaced as part of their dynamic. Nicole, I'm really curious in terms of what conversations have had in newsrooms that you've heard and talked to other journalists around how these 4 women of Congress who were duly elected and, have as much right to be respected as honorable members of Congress as anyone else. In terms of this use of terminology of the squad, how they're referred to as the squad, obviously that's lingo that we use in the street and kind of when we code switch. I think it's something that they refer to themselves sort of affectionately about, but there has been conversations around, are we sort of buying into sort of not giving them the proper respect or sort of using that kind of colloquial terminology? Has that been how they've been referred to as a group, those 4 women of Congress? What's been the conversations like around how to cover them and properly sort of give them their respect?
I mean, in specifically on this issue, I actually don't know if that using that term became like a big conversation or they just ran with what was said. But I mean, I think it's a good question that you bring because in this instance or in any other instances in the past or moving forward, I don't think those conversations happen enough, right? We see the same thing happening when, well, should we call this racist? Can we say that Trump made racist remarks? You know, those, I think that when he was elected president, like newsrooms, a lot of newsrooms didn't necessarily feel confident in how to handle those things and how to tell things and you know are we being too objective by calling it racist or are we being objective and I think it more of those types of conversations like we had with labeling something racist or not need to happen every single time, especially if this president is running for the re-election because this is you know we already had a round 2016. We should have learned a thing or two this time around, right?
That's
So
right.
specifically for the squad, I don't know. I was on Puerto Rico mode,
Yeah.
and I don't know if it became a big deal.
But it's
But
an
as
interesting conversation.
overall, yes, overall, it does. Like those kinds of conversations need to happen. Like you can just not use just flat out use the language that the president or anybody being problematic, racist, offensive comments is using, you know, without
Well,
having those conversations.
we also
first.
need to start with, in my opinion, with the Speaker of the House, who sort of, sort of fomented the House leadership, sort of fomented this internal rivalry, which sort of led to sort of Trump trying to take advantage of it. Madeleine Villanueva, always helpful in the chat, says that she shared a video that Ayanna Presley is owning the squad. They're very comfortable using that terminology. She also challenges the fact that America's always had these racial challenges, obviously from our beginnings, right, with slavery,
Yes.
and women not being allowed to write the vote. So no, those are very, very good points, Madeleine. The other thing I wanted to touch on is our Stacking 20 segment. I shared with you before we started taping, Nicole, that we always try to throw a little bit in of conversation about the elections. I don't know if LB's available, but LB, one thing that's interesting is that we've got but LB pops up is that, it's funny because when I said on the show, Vanessa's having some issues, connectivity. Well, just chat us your comments, Vanessa, because we only have a few more minutes. When I said on the show, I think I said on Facebook, they should have had the draw for the debates on TV, like March Madness style, had representatives from the campaigns, made it fun. And then some people thought I was being silly and trying to tease me about it. Well, guess what, LB? Guess what CNN decided to do next Thursday? They're doing the draw.
They're doing the draw because they know.
It's fun. It's fun. And it's critical. And this is my little tidbit. Biden better light a couple candles that he don't get Warren on this one. Because she will cook him on the Becking Reg stuff. And who knows the combinations that could happen. I think Julian definitely wants a shot at Biden too. To sort of be one of the champions and really challenge not only that generational argument, but also establish himself along with a Kamala as one of the true real civil rights candidates in this race.
Yeah.
And I think Biden's really crossing his fingers he don't get Warren. LB, what are you thinking about when it comes to the draw next week? What are the combinations and possibilities you're looking at?
Well, I definitely agree. I think the other thing I think we're looking at seeing is that we're talking about Detroit, we're talking about urban America, we're talking about housing, we're talking about those kind of issues there. And I think in that way, it should lead to Julian's, strength, right? I mean, if the former head of HUD can't talk about housing, then he might as well just go home, right? I mean, for all
and let's bring housing into the conversation, not to just diminish, your colleagues, Nicole, because I know it was an NBC event, but and look, it's only 2 hours, it's not perfect, but even though we were in Miami, no conversation about Puerto Rico, no conversation, very little about Latin America.
I mean, that's what happened, and that's my job as a journalist. It doesn't matter. It's the news organization I work for. They were in Miami, and you know, in with the whole current situation in Puerto Rico, not specifically with the protests because that came later, but overall with the hurricane aid and you know the fact that Florida is one of the states that felt the most the impact of Hurricane Maria and the pain that Puerto Ricans were grappling with, right? And Venezuelans, for example, a lot of Venezuelans have fled to Miami.
Cuban policy. I mean, there's a
Cuban
lot of issues.
policy, nothing you had. It was, you know, I agree 100%, and you know these are powerful voting blacks that need to be taken into account.
Well, and I think if someone's really smart, and I think you know the candidates have an opportunity here to tie up a couple of things in non quote unquote stereotypical ways, right? And so I think, for example, you can talk about Detroit. There's a lot of comparisons you can make between Detroit and Puerto Rico in terms of the junta and strategy there, and in terms of what do you do to a place to revitalize, right? There's a lot of discussion in Detroit about entrepreneurship, about rebuilding housing stock and doing those things. That is not just for any other place in America, but that's also Puerto Rico, right? That's also things that Latinos do. And so I think the candidate who is able to do that without seeming like they're pandering, well, again, will take a leap forward in terms of people's minds.
I'm glad you brought this up, LB. And with my day job at Unidos US, I travel the country having forums with Latino leaders and community members. And let me tell you something, when it comes to whether it's sort of the rent's too high or access to mortgages for home ownership or gentrification, housing is a big issue in the Latino community. And you know, it's even more fundamental than sort of like the obvious. I mean, LA is homelessness. There's homelessness that's impacting our community, and Latinos, we don't think of, I don't know, you know, that's an issue we don't discuss enough about how it manifests in our community. But there's something more fundamental I want people to share with us. Little Havana, Western San Antonio. I'll be in Las Vegas next week. You know, eastern side of Houston / Pasadena, Texas. The fundamental cultural dynamic is that because some of these neighborhoods are getting hipsterfied and gentrified, is that Latinos are feeling this sense of loss because we're losing control, we're losing access to housing in our traditional communities. These have been Latino neighborhoods decades, 100+ years in the case of places like Texas. So there's something going on in our culture and in our communities that I think is even more fundamental than the statistical reality. Housing's a big issue. Thank you all for bringing that up. I want to give people a few tidbits, and we're gonna start wrapping this up. In terms of the conversations I was having in DC this week, you know, this Biden strategy around running his Rose Garden campaign, I don't think is a good one. I mean, this guy, I mean, he's pushing, but I'll get into the details of how I heard this, but I mean, he tries to schedule all of this presidential stuff around family stuff. I mean, like grandkids' birthdays. I mean, and it's a very, like, I don't want to say casual, but almost like casual, I'm above it all kind of campaign. And that to me is not going to be a recipe for success. And again, I go back to when he gets in that debates, especially if Warren can get him on the financial stuff, in contrast to Kamala on the civil rights, I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic. And I'm not surprised he's slipping in the polls. I think we're starting to see people starting to understand that Warren and Harris in particular are looking very strong. The last thing is that in terms of Iowa, because thinking about, you know, we could say everything we want about the national polls, but really so much is going to be determined on who finishes in the top 2 to 4 in Iowa. From what I'm hearing is that Warren and even Booker have the top field campaigns on the ground in Iowa, and I'm hearing Sanders' campaign is not as strong as I would have assumed it would be, considering because of his background, because of the fact that he did very well in Iowa in 2016, and he's sort of doing a redo. So just some little tidbits I'm throwing out there. These are things I hear when I talk to our leaders around the country. And again, I think on some level, we've said it before. I think at this point, and we'll talk about it next week on the show, LB, I am formulating a theory very strong. While I don't think Bernie Sanders is going to win this election, I don't believe that. He could. He's got a little bit of a shot. But I think he will be the difference maker in this election because at the end of the day, the election, I think, in my opinion, is going to come down to if and when he's able to exit, if he's still in the 4th or 5th spot, to throw a support behind Harris and Warren, that could tip the elections.
I want to throw you a sports analogy here. I think that Bernie in many ways is the Kevin Durant of the Democratic field. Right, because he is the one person that all the other signings, all the other things is going to revolve around, right? Now, whether or not he's got, he's injured or not is your perspective. Is not like he's injured or not.
Yeah.
But everything else falls in line, right? Or falls in whether policy wise, whether or not who's,
he's won he's a victim of his own success because he's won the policy argument.
Yeah. So, but the question will be how his policy again, I think, we can have a separate discussion about strategy and what the GOP is doing, especially, I saw the latest attack ads that they've been trying to do that basically said, the squad equals anarchy, right? So, anything that they're arriving up to do it. So, we'll see whether or not the policy argument, him winning the policy argument is an actual victory for Democrats or not. But I do think that I would agree. I think he holds a huge sway. I don't know. I still tend to think that we still haven't seen that moment for him, whether or not, he's playing, he's par for the course. He's in the field, and, we just have to figure, he's got to figure it out.
Hey, and our Montana governor, Steve Bullock, is going to get a shot. So now this all rolls out. Anyway, we'll see. Hopefully they'll ask the gang a question, LB, this time. Well, they could ask the poor man a question. Anyway, as we wrap this up, wanted to give a quick, this episode was dedicated, first of all, to these people that are, and especially these children, they're being tortured on our southern border. I don't mince words. So we got our love and respect, our prayers for those children, those families. Eric Gardner, we lost that brother, 5 years ago, LB? 5 years ago, for selling Lucy's. And our attorney general, despite his own department's recommendation, is not gonna proceed with charges against Pantaleo. And Hector Figueroa celebrated Latino labor leader, the president of SEIU 32BJ out of New York, passed away suddenly last week. What a wonderful man. He was a mentor of so many of our friends, Natalia Salgado, Lucia Gomez. I could just go down the list of people, particularly in New York, that he mentored and supported. So we want to give our love, and a Puerto Rican as well. Healthcare, the fight for living wage for the Newark airport workers, who we've collaborated with a ton on over the years. So just descanse en paz, Hector Figueroa. You get the last word, Nicole. Anything else you'd like to share about your coverage, things you're looking out to do? By the way, this is about average for us. We always say an hour, it always goes over. So, this is, we just love this stuff. So just please let us know what you'd like to share with our Found in Translation community.
No, like Ray was saying earlier, my coverage revolves mainly on Latino communities in the U.S., Latin America, and the Caribbean. But given the news cycle in Puerto Rico and the fact that I just covered the issues affecting the island extensively, I'm probably gonna be on Puerto Rico land for the next week. For sure, we'll see if it's longer than that, unless something very crazy happens elsewhere. But I'll encourage everybody to continue to keep an eye on those developments, because people paying attention would help determine what happens in the island, and if the cause of the Puerto Rican people are going to be answered or not. If people don't pay attention, then it's hard to.
Where can people find you, Nicole, on social media to continue to follow your coverage?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Nicole Marie _A, and on Instagram at Nicole Acevedo Rodz. That is RODZ, short for Rodriguez.
There you go. And we are in the transition of rebranding the show as Found in Translation, working on logos. But currently, you can still find the podcast and the video coverage with our Raised podcast handle, which is on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. LB, any final words?
Look, we're in the middle of the summer. There's a lot going on. We're going to find out that there's a lot to both to America as well as to Puerto Rico and other spots that we didn't get a chance to. We could do an entire show on Hector Figueroa and his impact on labor. I think that's definitely a show that we've got to have. Not his impact in terms of how I think how he transformed in many ways labor's attitude towards Latinos. But at the end of the day, this is why we need shows like Found in Translation. That's why we need folks like you, Nicole, on the front lines of reporting, because there's just not enough of us talking about and telling our story. So thanks a lot for spending the time with us tonight.
No, thank you for creating this platform to have these conversations.
Thank you. And Vanessa Rivera chimes in. These are my parting words regarding Puerto Rico. The levee finally broke and the days of benditos are done with. Wow, good way to put it, Vanessa. Thank you all so much. Nicole, you know, fantastic. Love to have you back when you get a moment. I know you're very busy. And thank you, Albie, of course, for producing the show. Thank you again for watching and listening to the Found in Translation talk show, and have a wonderful evening.